with Harvard being the institution that it is, Doc,
Mm-hmm.
it represents a lot for a lot of people. It represents so much for America. But then to have this, and I don't want to say it's a bombshell, because I don't know if we are truly surprised that this institution was connected to the transatlantic slave trade the way it was.
Right.
And when we start to look at it, they put out this 134-page report detailing various elements. And I'm looking at the report right now, Doc.
Okay.
I mean, they broke it down into various sections or chapters, rather. They have an introduction, slavery in New England and at Harvard, financial ties, Harvard and the slave economy. They have chapter 4, intellectual leadership, Harvard, slavery and its legacies before and after the Civil War. Chapter 5 is the long legacies of slavery, segregation, marginalization, and resistance. And then they have chapter 6, which is conclusion. And then chapter 7 is recommendations to the president and fellows of Harvard College. And then there's 2 appendices attached to this report. First and foremost, when you heard this announcement from Harvard, what was going through your mind? Were you surprised, or were you like,
no, not
finally?
No, not in the least. Harvard had to get in the game. I mean, it had already been beaten to the punch by our sister Ruth Simmons, who, of course, convened the conversation at Brown University. Ruth Simmons was the first woman of African descent, first person of African descent to be the president of an Ivy League school when she took over Brown University some years ago. And she convened, as a former African American studies professor, Dr. Simmons, a committee to investigate the role of Brown in enslavement. And of course, she retired from Brown to great fanfare, and then decided to return to the South. She's from Louisiana, and she is just now retiring from being the president of Prairie View A&M. So Dr. Simmons kind of pointed the way to this. And as they mentioned in the report, in the recommendations phase, section 7, they note her. And they also note some other places. Princeton Theological Seminary, which is created a $27.6 million reparative endowment. Brown pledged $10 million. 10 was raised by private donors, and $8 million from the Brown Corporation. And we know that, I'll quote Scott Galloway, professor at NYU, who calls these Ivy League schools and others who are Ivy adjacents, the Stanfords, the Universities of Chicago, basically the NYUs. They're basically hedge funds who admit the children of the donors and a few other exceptional Negroes and others and burnish their brands. So Harvard was a little bit behind the curve. Georgetown had raised some money, and they're talking about descendants of those who were enslaved. They mentioned the University of Glasgow, in fact, in the Harvard report. So Harvard, of course, is Harvard, which means, we can't let these other schools outdo us. So they are going to set aside $100 million in an endowed fund to basically engage in forms of, I don't know, they don't call it reparations. They wouldn't be that silly. That would get them on the hook. I'm sure their lawyers workshopped every line in what they wrote. But, in the case of Brown, they put together some money for K-12 students in Providence, Rhode Island. They engaged in loan forgiveness for students, fellowships in terms of slavery studies. In terms of Harvard, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, finally. Harvard created some recommendations that, if nothing else, will burnish the Harvard reputation. So no, I'm not surprised at all. And anybody wants to read about the role of enslavement in the Ivy League, get Craig Stephen Wilder's book, Professor Wilder's book, Ebony and Ivy, where he basically traces the impact of enslavement and the creation of the Ivy League schools, all of them. So you can just get it in one book. So no, I wasn't surprised at Harvard at all.
Would you recommend that people take a look at this report, this 134-page report?
Absolutely. I think it's a masterpiece of forensic science. I mean, I love it. I mean, I was telling Joel and you before we came on. I mean, I've kind of been laughing. There have been a couple of moments I laughed out loud. Not at the tragedy of enslavement, of course, because we, of course, are victims of that, ongoing victims in the afterlife, but laughing at the kind of aggrandizement of Harvard's resources. Sven Burkett, who has written a number of studies talking about enslavement, he's got a book called Empire of Cotton. As it is noted, Burkett and his students, including undergraduate students, have been tracing some of this stuff for a very long time. And now, you know, in the wake of the reckoning of 2020, so-called, and of course, President Bacow in 2019 called this piece together, you know, Burkett plays a valuable role. And there's some top-notch scholars involved in the committee that was pulled together. Tamiko Brown-Nagin, who we've talked about before, you know, Professor Nagin at the dean of the Radcliffe Institute, professor of law at Harvard, who just wrote a great book on Constance Baker Motley, Evelyn Hammonds, Annette Gordon-Reed. I mean, there are a number of people, but again, reinforcing the Harvard brand. I started to say Howard, but we talk about that in a minute.
Right.
Little Sisters of the Poor Benefits Association, that is recommendation number 3, I think it is. Building partnerships is what they call it. But we'll talk about that with HBCUs.
Right. So, folks, I would advise folks that are watching today, if you want to get a copy of the report, you can download it for free at legacyofslavery.harvard.edu /report. legacyofslavery.harvard.edu /report. And you can read the report for those who are interested, those who would like to see what Harvard has to say about their involvement with slavery. This is an opportunity for you to see it. Dr. Carr, when we look at this, $100 million, and my first thought was, well, where did they get this number from? First, even before the number, what was the impetus of even creating a committee? And I know you mentioned everybody else was kind of doing it, but do you feel like there was a singular incident that was like, you know what, we need to do this? Or is it just a number of things that happened over the past couple of years? And you know, whether it's George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, whether it's, you know, all of those things, what do you think really got Harvard saying, okay, enough is enough, we got to say something?
Well, Harvard is the brand, as we know. It's not the King's College in New York, which was later renamed Columbia University. It's not any of the others. It's not Yale. It's Harvard. Harvard is the American Oxford, the American Cambridge, the American University of Berlin. It is the brand by which all other universities are measured. So $100 million is a lot more than 27.6. $100 million is more than 10. In other words, the number, I'm not going to say it's arbitrary, but it's a nice round number that it adds a zero to anybody else. You know,
right.
You know, and
it's big. It sounds substantial and significant.
No question. And just like Mackenzie Scott, who has given away millions in unrestricted funds in terms of philanthropic efforts to historically Black colleges, tribal colleges, and other institutions, the money on her Amazon stock has made that money back that she gave away and more since she's been giving it away. Harvard's not going to miss $100 million, and it's an endowment. It's not direct investment. It's not like they're saying, okay, we're going to give $10 million to 10 different HBCUs to do what you want. No, it's not. No, it's not that. It's not like they're saying we're going to endow several K-12 institutions and you can do what you want with the money. In other words, it's not a form of reparations. It's really the money's not really going anywhere in terms of, you know, Harvard is going to, and for some of that money, I'm sure, pay itself. And you know, they're offering, among other things, the possibility of exchange programs with Harvard faculty and HBCU faculty. Now, maybe they're going to pay the HBCU faculty salaries when they come work at Harvard. But of course, that would mean that the HBCUs would have to pay the Harvard salaries, which would actually hurt the HBCUs. Anyway, I'm not sure how that's going to work. But the point is that that $100 million is not being given away. To quote the line from the Jimmy Stewart film, It's a Wonderful Life, Potter's not selling, Potter's buying. But at any rate, so that they're burnishing their reputation. Now, is it better to have this money than not set aside? Of course, it's better to have this money set aside. But I'm not surprised at all. In fact, when the opening at the beginning of chapter 1, the first line in the report said Harvard's motto, Veritas, which means truth, of course, inscribed on gates, doorways, and sculptures all over campus, demands of us truth. What? And as you know, brother, as it is said to have been said to Pontius Pilate, when Pontius Pilate said, "What is the truth?" and would not stay for an answer. So when you read the report, the truth of the matter is a great deal of it is big up in Harvard. It's big up. In fact, when I first saw the story break and downloaded the report, I went looking for the things about Harvard that I expected Harvard to lift up. Who are the exceptional Negroes that it is let in? So I went looking for the HBCU folk. The Du Bois is in there, of course. Eva Beatrice Dykes, a lot of people don't know her. She was at Oakwood College. She came out of DC, went to Dunbar High School, went to Howard, came to Harvard. They said, we don't count the Howard degree. You got to take a Harvard degree. They talk about that in there. Richard T. Greener, who was the dean of Howard's Law School, was a graduate of Harvard University. He's in there. But what I'm looking for, and then I started reading the footnotes. And as I read the footnotes, what I noticed, take Eva Dykes, for example. I'm looking at Eva Beatrice Dykes, who was the first woman of African descent to qualify for a PhD, complete the requirements for a PhD in history. One of 3 Black women who graduated PhDs the year she graduated. And I'm looking at the footnotes, and what I see accessed is the Radcliffe archives for the things they have in their archives of Eva Dykes. I said, that's cool. But what I didn't see were the books written by Black scholars, including a cat at Oakwood for years, talking about Eva Dykes. I'm like, how did Harvard evade the opportunity to quote Black scholars writing at Black institutions about somebody they're saying was a person who suffered racism at the place that, well, I tell you, chef's kiss. So yeah, you got to read it, man. Forensic science. It's a beautiful elevation of the Harvard brand in a kind of moment of, I don't want to call it cosplay, but self-flagellation in pursuit, as they said, something that ends of them truth. Anyway, we'll see.
Folks, we are having the conversation around Harvard's claiming or saying that they're going to commit $100 million to create a legacy of slavery fund after they have come out with a 134-page report outlining their involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. This report of the Presidential Committee on Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery shows intimately, based upon their history, their research, and the work that was done by their committee, that Harvard gained and benefited from slavery. And so they are trying to come clean with this report and with other ideas and goals to address this issue. We've been talking to Dr. Greg Carr, who is a professor of Africana Studies at Howard University and is the host of the Black Star Network's The Black Table. Dr. Carr, I want to throw up here just something that they put out. This is what Harvard put out. Keenan, if we could post this quote on the screen talking about what Harvard is planning to do, some of their key goals in this whole effort. They are planning to address slavery legacy. The report calls for spending the money in a multitude of tracks. 1, by tracing the modern day descendants of enslaved people at Harvard. 2, by building memorials and curriculum to honor and expose the past. Number 3, by creating exchange programs between students and faculty members at Harvard and those at historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and by collaborating with tribal colleges. And 4, by forging partnerships to improve schools in the American South and the West Indies, where plantation owners and Boston Brahmins made their intertwined fortunes on the backs of the enslaved. Seems like these are very lofty goals here. And Dr. Carr, when you look at goals like this, I mean, I'm talking about the memorials, the curriculum, and they said that even that a lot of these goals are vague on purpose because they wanted to hear feedback from other folks within the Harvard community and outside of the Harvard community to add to it. But do you think this is a good start? These four goals, is this a good start for us?
It's a great start for Harvard. I don't think anybody should be applauded for confessing to a crime.
Right, and that's fact.
So I'm always wary when we celebrate having been abused when an abuser says I did it. That doesn't really change the relationship.
Mm.
And in reading through the recommendations, I understand they were intentionally vague. The direct descendants, I love this one. Let me read it again. It says, we further recommend that in recognition of this lineage, the university engage with these descendants through dialogue, programming, information sharing, relationship building, and educational support. Through such efforts, these descendants can recover their histories, blah, blah, blah. The last one there, educational support. So you're giving scholarships? Now, in the case of Georgetown, which offered assistance to those who are direct descendants of those who were enslaved under Georgetown's auspices, including several Africans who were actually sold to keep the university's doors open, those people still have to satisfy Georgetown's entrance requirements. So, we'll see. I mean, and that's just in terms of the people who can trace. Now, mind you, there is a lawsuit. Tomorrow, Lauren is having a lawsuit because one of her ancestors is in that photograph collection that is at Harvard, that Harvard now claims that it owns. I mean, so they're in court about that. So you got a direct chance to do the right thing there. But let's move on quickly because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. The enduring partnerships thing was interesting. The visiting appointments between HBCU faculty and Harvard faculty, that's interesting. Okay, as I mentioned before, the other thing they said is maybe they're going to establish a Du Bois Scholar Exchange. So HBCU students, junior level and above, can come to Harvard, and Harvard students can go to HBCUs. Now, that kind of exchange program has existed for years among HBCUs and HWCUs. But here's what I found out at Howard after 22 years of teaching. There are several Ivy League schools who stopped doing it. Why? Because the Black students would spend a semester at Howard and say, yeah, we good. We're not going back. So they started transferring to the HBCU.
Wow.
So when I saw Harvard saying they want to establish this, my first question, and it's an open question, is, did you all have one before and then you stopped it? Because I know several schools in the Ivy League, which I won't name, and Ivy adjacents, who canceled doing it because the Black students were coming and staying. So again, there's nothing in this report that doesn't help Harvard. In fact, I mentioned this finally, Appendix 2, the note on process. They talk about all the things all the people they consulted, the librarians and things like that. They said they consulted librarians at several schools, including Howard, that digitized information for them. Well, that led me to this other question in number 3, enduring partnerships. They want to digitize collections at HBCUs to help them, what they call it, safeguard these materials. Safeguard? Really? They did. There's a partnership between Princeton and Harvard right now that is digitizing the records of the Black Teachers Association, Pre-Integration Teachers Association. It's being headed by 2 fine Black scholars, one at Princeton, one at Harvard. Again, I won't name them. Y'all can look it up for yourself. My question is, how y'all going to digitize institutional records of Black institutions that were preserved and fought during Jim Crow to end Jim Crow, and now the stuff end up at your house? Y'all ain't slick. It's gonna, and then now you'll invite 2 or 3 remarkable Negroes up there. Maybe you'll give them a Carnegie, or they'll get a MacArthur Genius Grant. And what you now have said is, look at us. Look at how great we are. We're helping these. Meanwhile, the institutions themselves, maybe they'll get a couple of exchange students, a couple of exchange faculty to burnish the fact that they've worked among the Negroes. But look at how they watch it. When y'all read this, look at how they characterize HBCUs. Look on page 9 when you see HBCUs first mentioned, and they talk about them doing the best they could, but ultimately not having the resources to be. You know what? Just cut a check. Y'all love Du Bois so much.
Cut a check.
Write Fisk a $50 million check, no strings attached. That ain't no money. You'll make it back in 6 months on your endowment. Write him a $50 million check, but you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that at all.
So I mean, and so it like, going piece by piece, looking at each one of these goals, I'm wondering, I mean, there were Black people in the room. There were Black people at the table.
Yeah.
So how was it that they were in the room at the table, but yet these goals, these recommendations still come across as being Harvard's recommendations, Harvard beneficial?
Because they're of Harvard. And this is not a criticism of any of them. Certainly not William Julius Wilson, certainly not Tia Miles or any of the other. And I mentioned those 2 in particular because Tia Miles is a younger scholar and William Julius Wilson is one of the most respected Black scholars in the country. This isn't the William Julius Wilson of 40 or even longer years ago, writing in the Negro Digest, Black World, debating about the future of HBCUs. This is the William Julius Wilson who was recruited by Henry Gates and others into Harvard when they were building that dream team, when Gates and Cornell West and William Julius Wilson and others were brought to Harvard. And then the other Ivy Leagues started doing the same thing. You know, I'm not critical of any of those Black scholars, any of those Black academics, because they are part of that system. And in those debates and rooms, you know, this is a very rich report. They're not ducking some of the difficult things that are raised. At the same time, they are part of that institution. In other words, reparations is about a lot more than burnishing the institutions that benefited from the enslavement of Black people. If you're talking about real reparations, you're talking about repair. So I don't have any problem with that. Now, if all those faculty decided that they were going to resign and come work at HBCUs, I'd be like, okay, that's interesting. Go on, because HBCUs aren't the answer either. Harvard is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. What's the situation for poor Black people and brown people in Cambridge? Just like Yale is in New Haven. Anybody been to New Haven know that there's Yale and there's the hood. So I'm saying, you know, at least with Ruth Simmons and Brown, they're talking about the surrounding area there or around Brown. Now, so I don't think Harvard is excluding any of that. What I'm saying is, as you say, if this is the start and they kept it intentionally flexible, let's see what happens next. And, you know, we'll all wait and see.
So speaking of reparations, I mean, you talked about Professor Tamika Brown-Nagin.
Yes.
And she said in an interview last month, just before this came out, of course, that they were being intentional about making sure that this $100 million is not seen as reparations, because she said, quote, reparations means different things to different people. So fixating on that term, I think, can be counterproductive.
Absolutely.
So do you think that was the right decision for them to not frame this as part of a reparations conversation?
I know they be leaving themselves open to very real critique, because reparations means one thing. And Professor Brown-Nagin, a brilliant scholar, on the faculty at the law school, Tamika Brown-Nagin got a JD. She know damn well you better not call this reparations. So you can't. Of course, it's not reparations. You can't talk about reparations. A professor at Columbia, my friend Catherine Frankie, who wrote a book called Repair several years ago that I actually teach at Howard Law School. This is a white woman, radical scholar at the law school, to whom I've sent students. In fact, one of my best students, Brother Jalil Muhammad. He grew up in the Nation of Islam. Jalil is graduating from Columbia Law in a couple of weeks.
Wow, I know Brother Jalil.
You know Jalil. Jalil is my man.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Jalil is a brilliant scholar, and she's got him working on this reparations work. He's extending her work. What Catherine Frankie said is, my ancestors benefited from enslavement, even though I am not from people who were here. But I came here, and guess what I got coming here? Whiteness. She said, you know what? I think there should be perhaps a wealth transfer tax, and that money be put in a common fund. You can have community land trust, you can have education, you can have all. She writes about this in her book Repair. Harvard not talking about that. And Professor Brown-Nagin knows good and well they're not talking about that. So of course now when she says we shouldn't get fixated on it, I suspect that part of the reason that you don't want to get fixated on it is because that will require more of that institution than you are willing to call it to account. And when you read this report and you look at the history of Ewart Grenier, for example, who founded the African American States program at Harvard, whose daughter Lonnie, of course, we know, the jurist, and who Bill Clinton sold out. When you look at all these things in that report, when you look at William Hastie, Charles Hamilton Houston, the people who Harvard produced, Eva Dykes, W.B. Du Bois, most of them, many of them in that group came out of HBCUs. Now, if there's going to be a wealth transfer to HBCUs to train more students, that would look more like reparations, because you benefited from HBCU faculty. In fact, they say it in the report. These HBCU undergrads you sent to us burnished our reputation, even though from 1898 to 1940, there were about 60 Black people in the Harvard student body at Harvard College. So the Negroes you did send here were superstars. And the Negroes who are there now are superstars and want to continue to shine in a firmament that they would not want to diminish by continuing to hold it to account in a way that might cost them their jobs. So I don't have no critique of them. They want to stay working on John Harvard's. I started calling it John Harvard's plan.
Right.
Anyway, but I mean, I'm not gonna call it John Harper's plantation. I'm not gonna call it. I'm not gonna, even though they, as they detail in the report,
Right.
that literal seal of the law school for years, that sheaf of wheat in the middle was a gesture toward the enslaved plantations, out of which they got their donations and their profits and their investment returns on investments for loans. Oh, they detail it beautifully in the report. What you gonna do about it? We're gonna set up a fund and talk about it.
That's and see, Doc, and Dr. Carr, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I'm still not hearing. Give me the substance. You know what I'm saying? I feel like we're getting the appetizer, but we're not at the main course right now. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you know, like when you're talking about reparations, I know part of the conversation has been on education in terms of, okay, the descendants of enslaved people should be going to certain Ivy League schools like Harvard, Yale, free of charge.
Mm-hmm. Or better yet, going to HBCUs and other schools with some of that Harvard money. That would be reparations.
Wow.
See, but how's it repaired when you basically, in fact, the last thing they write in the conclusion is much remains to be done as we seek to live up to our highest ideals. But by undertaking these endeavors in good faith and with a commitment to meaningful action, the university imbues Veritas with new meaning and renews its commitment to excellence. Wait a minute, is that the same commitment to excellence you had when them enslaved Africans was working on the?
Come on.
So what you talking about? No.
And and Dr. Carr, explain this to me, because you've been in academia for years. You understand the dynamics, you understand the power players, you understand how everything works out.
Sure. Some of it.
What you say some of it, but when we look at this situation, I mean, like, HBCUs are struggling. HBCUs in this country are struggling. They're still trying to make ends meet, right? Whether you're talking about Morgan, Howard, any HBCU, they're struggling. We're still petitioning. I'm gonna use that term lightly. The government for more assistance.
Yes.
But then you have institutions like Harvard, like Columbia, like Yale. Harvard has an endowment. Check this out, folks, of $53 billion.
Wait, what? Never slaying. 53 billion, baby.
$53 billion.
Wait a minute. How much is a billion? A billion is how many million? A billion is 1,000 million, right?
Right.
If you set aside 100 million, you set aside 1/10 of a billion, and you got 53. What, man? They're gonna make their money back by the time the show is over.
50, or by the time the show is over.
And they didn't even give it out. It's an endowment, meaning what? We are setting it aside and keeping control of it. Come on, y'all.
That's what I'm saying. So I feel like there needs to be, the gap of inequality between HBCUs and the little money that HBCUs are getting versus these larger institutions. And I'm thinking to myself, it can't be that difficult to come up with a strategy or way to bring some real equity in it. And I always say this, Dr. Carr, and I've been saying this, please correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. King said, "Is always the right is never the wrong time to do the right thing."
No question.
And so it's like at this point,
that's right.
At this point, I'm convinced that you just don't have the will. You really just don't have the will to do the right thing.
Right.
So I mean, like I hear what Harvard is saying, and I think, hell, any institution, any business or corporation, I think they all gain. If you're talking about Ford Motor Company, you talk whatever industry, they have all benefited from the transatlantic slave trade. They have all benefited on the backs of our people. But at this point, the admission is that's nothing to me. No. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Substantially.
I don't have any real criticism of Harvard because I don't have any expectations of Harvard. See, this is the thing. I mean, the idea is that we have these expectations. And so when you talk about the endowment, Howard is the closest HBCU to $1 billion endowment. It's just south of $1 billion. It's now in the high 800s. There's no other HBCU that's close. Spelman, I think, is second. They may be over the $300 million mark. But there aren't 10 HBCUs among the 103 or 4 or 5. And shout out to Morris Brown for reacquiring accreditation in the AUC, there aren't even 10 that have $100 million or more. And Harvard's sitting on 53 plus and making money every day with investments that speak to their participation in predatory lending, capitalism, this kind of thing. And in the report, they talk about the challenges Black students and others have made to how they invest their money. But, you know, again, I don't have any criticism. I'm glad that this report came out. I think it sets a model and a template for this, for how to understand how higher education works at that level.
Yeah.
But I do think, though, finally, Farajii, that our challenge, and you've covered this extensively, brother, in the culture over the time that you've been on the air, it involves the least of these: forgiving student debt, lowering tuition costs, addressing K-12. And what Harvard has said in this report is we want to help with all of those things by sourcing our Harvard scholars that have analyzed this material. And yeah, okay, so you're going to burnish yourself for writing new reports on K-12 education and interface with school districts. You're going to do that for free now, right? Okay, or better yet, you're going to go in these school districts with your brilliant analysis at the Harvard School, Graduate School of Education, and you're going to help them acquire the similar type of brilliant analysis, and then you're going to get out of their way, right? You're going to show up without the Harvard brand, right? Hell no, you're not going to do that because you want credit for it. And as you said, I mean, one thing about virtue signaling is signaling is key. It's got to be Harvard that does this. So yeah, nah.
So I guess that leads us to the next question. I mean, since you don't have any expectations, should we even have a discussion about accountability, holding them accountable?
Yeah. I mean, that's recommendation number 7, ensure institutional accountability.
Dr. Carr, you a trip, brother.
No, they are, man. But this is what I love. This is what I love. They say they're going to set up an accountability institutional apparatus.
You can't do that.
Sure you can.
No, you can't, Dr. Carr. Look, it's like, hey, Doc, hey, look, brother, it's like when the police department,
exactly,
when the police department has, and we're gonna talk about this today on the show. The police department whipping our ass, right?
Farajii,
and then be like, we're gonna have our internal affairs investigate.
Yes, sir. You are a national treasure, brother. That's when you put it. You put it exact. That is the perfect analogy, brother.
Like, how you gonna investigate yourself,
brother? Well, or maybe you wait 20 or 30 years, and you go get the people who wrote The Wire, and you make an HBO series on corrupt cops and pay yourself again. Hey, wait a minute! They came back to your hometown to make another show about dirty cops. And get some awards. I mean, we've seen this show before.
I mean, I just don't get it. I don't get it.
Yes, you do.
That is the craziest thing in the world. I don't get it. How do you investigate yourself? Brother. And then you like, it's like the conversation I think we had on Brother Roland show, just in terms of these companies that say they want to give some money for racial justice. And then, or they give themselves, they like pat themselves on the back.
No question.
And it's like, that is counterproductive to what we're trying to do, to the progress we're talking about here. You can't investigate yourself. So, I mean, and I'm saying, is there, and please pardon, let me know if I don't know, because I really don't know, Doc. Is there a way or a commission or a group or institute or think tank, somebody that can go to these institutions and say, okay, you are at a place that you want to redress this your grievance or your ties to slavery. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going, as outside independent group of individual scholars and researchers and historians, we're going to hold you accountable. And if you don't live up to our standards of accountability, then you owe us.
Yeah.
Is there?
Absolutely. In the appendix 2, you'll see, for example, the consultancies they engaged in. They had all these dialogues. They brought people in to have conversations, and that's beautiful. One of the recommendations they want to do when they deal with Native Americans, they want to have a landmark conference with the Native American program at Harvard to advance national dialogue on the histories and legacies of indigenous slaveries and colonialism, all this kind of thing. And I'm sure there will be publications and there will be academic accolades and this kind of thing. But here, what you just said, and they say this at the end of their report, they say, the entanglements we've had with enslavement are in the past. They can't be undone, but the present and future are ours as a university community to shape. Now, of course, within that field, here's a solution based on what you just said, Brother Farajii. Let's say Harvard says we're going to put 10, 20, $30 million into establishing an independent, almost like a community review board.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And we encourage, and next thing you know, because see, this other thing about Harvard did it. So guess what? Yale working on their report somewhere. Columbia, already, they got to get their report. Okay. Again, go get Craig Stephen Wilder's book. You probably already gonna pay him a consultancy or get him to come in and give a talk. But anyway, now you've established this separate institution and you leave it alone.
Yeah.
And you don't, this is the other thing you don't do. You don't populate it with your faculty members.
That's right.
It's not the usual suspects. And you don't build links with Social Science Research Council, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Mellon Foundation. Right. You don't then try to figure out how you can get some subsidized grants from the National Endowment for the Arts. No. We gave this group the money. And the people who were picked to decide first how to do the money came from Black institutions, came from brown institutions, came from indigenous institutions, and they don't have any ties to any of these places that create what some people have called the professional managerial class. So you know what you're not going to be able to do? Engage in what Catherine Liu and others call virtue hoarding. Because see, the thing is, it's the usual suspects,
right?
And they have some exquisite Blacks who will excoriate you. They'll do the right poem, they'll have the beautiful art, and they get fellowships, and they come right. And then you set them up and you get out of their way. What comes out of that? I trust what comes out of that. But then they can't do that. Why? Because there's no value in that for us.
I was about to say, Doc, there's no value in that. They can't gain and benefit. They can't control. Now, here's my final point, Doc, and I'm so grateful that you spent some time with us today. I mean, my point is that, like, at this point, the conversation about repairing the damage, we can put it as the term reparations, or we could just look at the term justice. At this point, how do we shift the conversation from just money talk to legacy building, to start to here's why I'm asking. I have an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yes, sir.
By the time my son, God willing, gets to college in 10 years, and then 16 years for my daughter, if I don't want to have a conversation and be like, hey, son, yeah, we got reparations back in 20-something, but we spent it. So, we're going to have to figure out how to pay for your college.
How about that?
I don't, that doesn't, like, getting a check at this point doesn't seem like it will ease my soul.
Well, that's not going to happen. No.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to check. I need to have an investment in the futures of Black children and Black people. That's what I'm saying. When we talk about the stock and all of that, what is the futures of Black children and Black people in this country? Because that's the only investment. Like, I don't need a check. Like, I work and all of that. So I'm trying to figure out what is going to be the future of the children. So that way they don't have to carry this burden 15, 20 years from now. And my children come up to their dad, what did Dad, it's college is crazy, Dad. Like, it's very expensive. I thought y'all talked about that 10, 15 years ago. We did, son, but a lot of Black people just wanted to check.
How about that? Yeah, that's tough, Farajii. I think, and Frankie writes about this in her book, Repair. Wealth transfer, first of all, public dollars are our dollars. We pay taxes. And so policy making in terms of how to spend public dollars, if Harvard wants to make a dent, and I'm not saying they won't, again, I'm saying this is an opportunity. Use Harvard's clout, use the number of Harvard graduates who are in public policy making at the state, federal, and local levels to engage in resource investment in these communities that are suffering. Use your cultural capital, the one you burnish so much, to intervene there. Now, when you're talking about self-repair, of course, we can't look outside for that. And so we're having a conversation in the Black Star Network in part because, Brother Roland and all of us, are saying, let us support our own. This becomes a threat to the hierarchy because while we're having this conversation, I'm sure this Harvard report is going to be discussed on white-facing media, and you're going to have some experts in there, and they're going to blah, 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 and it's going to be a very different conversation. Why? Because it's burnishing those places. I'm not against the check. I think everybody should get a check, but I also think that can't be the objective, as you said. What we need to engage in terms of reparations transcends even the United States of America. If you're going to reimagine the country we live in and the world we live in, it's going to require a different look at the way we even think about each other. And I do not see that in the Harvard report, nor would I expect to see it in the Harvard report. No. Harvard's going to remain Harvard.
Right.
You see. And hey, be Harvard. But my question is, what's Tuskegee going to do? What's the legislature going to do in Louisiana for Southern and Grambling? What are we talking about with Alabama A&M and Alabama State? And more importantly, the K-12 schools. More importantly, everything from basic needs like food, shelter, housing, and that's policy making. You want to impress Harvard? Get some of them presidents and senators and some people to act right. Right. And we'll hand and on the grant and give us the resources. I think that's the kind of thing we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Doc, I'm like, I want it all. Yeah, I want the money. I want land. I want educational equity. I want it all. Because now it's becoming more and more insulting and a slap in the face of us. Like you got all these institutions that recognize that they have gained and benefited from slavery. Therefore, they've gained and benefited from our ignorance up to this present day.
Yes.
You can say that. You can, oh, yes. No, I want it all.
Yes.
I want, and there should be no compromise because the United States government, these institutions, corporations, they have made us and conditioned us to believe that we were gaining something, and we're in some cases, some of the worse than we were 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Of course.
But so I want it all. I don't want no compromise. It's like, nah, bro, we can get a check.
Well, I mean,
let's get an acre of land for each family. You know what I'm saying? Let's make sure our children go to school for free. Like, I want it all.
Yes. Well, that's tough, Farajii, because I think what that requires then is a facing that we're not going to get that by behaving the way we've been behaving. The only way we made progress in any moment in world history is when the people who are being taken advantage of say, "That's it. You're not taking advantage of me anymore." So when you say that, of course, I think about the fact that again, Martin Luther King is evoked. Went to school at Boston University, had to come out of Morehouse and Crozier Theological Seminary, right there in the area. And Dr. King, of course, when he's critiquing militarism and materialism, when he is critiquing this whole structure that the society is based on, what you're talking about can be done, but it can't be done as long as we're asking. We have to turn away. One of the reasons Harvard almost has to write a report like this, and the other schools have to do it, is because people are increasingly turning away from those institutions. Yeah, as well they should. Yeah. So it's like, wait. Look. We understand. People are like, I'm not, but damn about Harvard. Ask yourself this: why was Nas a fellow at Harvard? Why did he receive the Du Bois medal? Why is there a hip hop archive at Harvard? Why? Because those young people from the Caribbean and from Black and brown communities in New York and everywhere else stood on their own ground, made their own culture without asking permission for anybody. It became so important that these places that want to be prestigious had to associate themselves with it. That's how you get reparations. You build your own. What Elijah Muhammad say? Accept your own and be yourself. Your own and be yourself. Watch how quick we get reparations when we decide we're gonna reserve our labor. We're not running up and down the football field for University of Alabama anymore. We're gonna go play at Tuskegee. Oh, we've got to investigate. Yeah. Go ahead. It ain't gonna be enough yet. You understand?
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches. I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now. We have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? Peace.